So, John, welcome to the show. How's things with yourself, my man?
Things are wonderful. Thank you so much for asking, and thank you for having me here on this lovely day.
Look, I'd be stupid not to. You are a man with so many interesting legs attached to you, so I really cannot wait to kind of like delve into all of these different areas. I really think this is going to be a very powerful episode with you.
Well, thank you. I will try not to disappoint.
Now, John, I literally want to just jump straight in on here. Now, you're a person who has mastered the art and craft of storytelling, but I know you yourself have your own hero's journey, which is super powerful. So I'd love to know, just in short, what is the story of John? Like, how have you gone from the things that you've done, the accolades, and how has it brought you through to today?
Oh goodness, where to start? The abridged version the abridged but unsanitized version of my upbringing is I was born in New York. I grew up about 35 minutes east of New York City in a place called Long Island. It is a magical place. We are famous for our iced tea. Long Island produces a very interesting class of people. It is very, very important historically in the Revolutionary War, and we produced Teddy Roosevelt and a number of other members of the Roosevelt clan, Billy Joel, Billy Crystal, other funny Jewish guys named Billy probably, but also both Mariah Carey and Lindsay Lohan. And so it seems that we produce geniuses and train wrecks in equal measure. And then right in the middle of that Venn diagram sits me. And so that is where I'm from. I grew up in an abusive household. I'm of mixed racial descent. So if you were to listen to my name, Dr. Giovanni Vincenzo not a doctor, but it sounds cool, Giovanni Vincenzo Romaniello III, you assume I am of Italian descent. But I grew up in a mixed race household. My dad's mom is half black and Irish and Native American, and then so I grew up with like Southern roots. On Long Island in New York, and so I go back and forth from being like fucking Italian to my grandmother who had a beautiful Southern accent. She was from a place called Buckaloo County, Alabama, and very mixed upbringing. My father was very abusive to my mother and myself. There was instances of childhood sexual abuse with an uncle, and none of that really became part of the overall story of anything that I do now until I really started talking about it more, maybe in 2017 as I started to work through a lot of the trauma. But I was always a bookish sort of guy. A lot of video games, a lot of books, big dragons, Dungeons and Dragons guy, a lot of nerdy shit. I played Magic the Gathering in the high school cafeteria when I was in the eighth
No
grade.
judgment.
Nobody told me that, like, if you're going to be a nerd, you should do it behind closed doors. I did it all in the open. I didn't have the good sense to be ashamed of myself. So even then I was being authentic. And so I wound up going to school, majoring in like 3 different things. And so graduated with a degree in psychobio and English with a focus on creative writing, and a minor in history with a concentration on religion. And so it was very interesting to talk to, wildly unqualified to hold a job of any kind, and started a personal training company because I'd gone through this fitness transformation. And then over the past like 10 years, well, it's really like honestly the past 16 years, first maybe 10 were really fitness related. I was running personal training companies and gyms in and around New York City. And then in 2009 brought everything online. Went through the whole content marketing, email marketing, e-products thing, eventually got involved in business coaching and helping other people do that. Wrote a best-selling book, which was quite a thrill for my mother. She finally acknowledged that what I do is a real job, and that was in 2013. And between now and then, I've done a ton of ghostwriting for other people. I have been a super high-level, in-demand copywriter, getting paid. I think my biggest copywriting job was $5,000 to write a video sales script. I have advised for all sorts of companies which we can get into. These days, I am mostly writing books and teaching storytelling workshops. I do some business and branding coaching, but it's more of like a consulting gig for larger companies, 7-figure companies plus. And I work with a lot of entrepreneurs teaching them how to write books. And so that is sort of like the abridged version of how I got to where I am. But all of the different things are talk aboutable. Whether I think that most of life is not highlights, although those are very fun to talk about, but it's really what happens between the highlights, what happens between the best-selling book and then the next pivot. It's all the days between. Most of life is really just random Thursdays strung together, and we punctuate them with these achievements, but it's what we do in the day-to-day that allows us to have those achievements. And that is really what I help people write about, because if you can find the magic in the mundanity, if you can make those idle Tuesdays sound beautiful and inspiring, then it's much easier to take all the other stuff, which is by itself already interesting, and make it relatable.
I love the way how you just articulated that. I absolutely love this, because for me, since I've been going on my own journey of entrepreneurship and helping other people, I think that it's very clear that stories are the biggest thing that really, really do draw people in, and they make a brand, a person very relatable. And I think when we really think about it, the art of human communication, even through tribal periods, was we used to tell stories around the campfire. So it's
Absolutely.
Always been a thing, but we just seem to have become more and more distant from actually being able to communicate and tell stories. And I really think that what you're doing is such a big piece of the puzzle as to why people are struggling, either being authentic, exposing their true story themselves, or does that make sense? Do you see a correlation with that sort of stuff?
There are a lot of factors. I think people in general are, we are creatures of fear. It has kept us alive for countless generations. And it's amazing how much fear we have of one another and fear of ourselves in terms of being judged. And we are taught early on to function in polite society. There are things about which you should not speak. Don't talk about sex. Don't talk about money. Don't talk about politics. Don't talk about religion. But these are some of the most important pillars in the way that we ourselves live our lives. And we have moved into this new paradigm where wherever your politics lie, whether you're on the right or the left, identity politics is a big part of how we identify as humans. And if you're not willing to put some aspect of your core belief out into the world, it's very difficult for people to feel a connection to you. And so much of what we do is motivated by those core beliefs and trying to live in accordance with those values. And the big thing about the internet, it has democratized the way that we are living our values, but also the values themselves. Whereas it was for so long just assumed that there was one way to live, that this let's call it the traditional sanitized Judeo-Christian system of living. It was assumed that that was the right way to live. We now, because of the internet, have access through information, through exposure, to all of these other ways to live that are equally correct in so many regards. And you get to choose what's right for you. You get to live in the way that's right for you, as long as it isn't hurting other people. And we have to unlearn all of these habits about keeping things secret and keeping things in line with what we think other people want to hear. Because at the end of the day, connection is fostered behind. It used to be behind closed doors. Like your best friends would be the people who knew all the stuff about you. But now that's how we live. It's all out in the open, and I think that is terrifying to so many people, to all of us on some level.
I think that's when it comes down as well to this whole social media. It's exposing us. It's for who we actually are, isn't it? Do you know what I mean?
It is, yeah. Amanda, my partner, Amanda Bucci, talks about this a lot. And she says that social media is a reflection of the collective consciousness. And there is so much that we all now do differently because of social media, because it's become okay, because we've seen other people do it. And it is who we are on social media. We have an option. We can either manufacture something and present it to the world and hope nobody picks up on the fact that it is artifice, or we can go through the process of using social media to both expose ourselves but also become ourselves, and display not only the thing that we are, but also really, really display the becoming of that thing, and go through that transformation process in front of everyone. And I think more and more that's what people are opting to do. And if you look at the types of people you and I interact with, the businesses we help, so many of them are personal brands, or brands built around personality-driven marketing. The people who are willing to do that are invariably the people who are doing well. I choose to help people do that through telling story, because as you mentioned, it is the way that we've communicated since before there was a written record. That oral history is how we have always done it. It's also how our brains are wired to really break down and synthesize information and learn things. And we can get into that as well.
I love it. Absolutely love it. I was going to say, like, obviously with all of this stuff, we seem to have become like desensitized, or we just don't, we're not taught this. Are we? I never heard of anything like this in English. It was just write a story. There was no, we didn't really get taught the real crux of communication. Now, I'd love to know from your point of view, of someone who's a Jedi master within this realm,
Sure.
Is there anything you do to, or exercises or something along the lines of that, what you do to kind of like, to bring out either a person's true nature into their story, or to get them to kind of lean more into telling more about themselves, sharing themselves? Or
the first thing I try to do with anyone is get them to fall into the emotional space where the story took place. And that is asking a lot of leading questions, and it's a lot of why. And then it's a lot of trying to help them tell the story using real effective context setting. And just to give you an example, one of the things that we forget when we tell a story, and the reason that so many people are bad storytellers, is even though it is your own story, and you forget that because it's your story, no one else has access to the information that you do. And you say things like, I could tell you a story about something that happened in my home city of New York. And I could just begin, I can get into the story and just like letting that happen. But to be a great storyteller, I have to have some understanding of what comes to your mind when I say New York City. For most people who don't live there, for most people who haven't spent a lot of time there, what comes up is Times Square. It's big, tall buildings of concrete and steel. It is yellow cabs. It's such intense busyness. It's whatever you picked up from Friends or Seinfeld. Whatever filtered into your mind from September 11th. All of those things. And to tell a story effectively, people need to see themselves in it. And so if I were to tell you a story about New York, I'd have to take the time to build my version of New York in your head and tell you that this particular story happened in a neighborhood called the West Village, which doesn't have big, tall buildings. It is very quiet. There's a lot of tree-lined streets. It's brownstones. It's very old, and it's the part of the city that isn't on the numerical grid. It is the part of the city in Greenwich Village that sprang up around the docks and was very important during the Revolutionary War period, when the streets, it's more like a European city in the way it's set up with things crisscrossing. Whereas when you get to the northern part of the city, it's very mathematical. And so I could build this for you and then tell you a story, and then you'll be opted into the thing, whatever the event was that I want to bring you. And so when you start asking people these questions and they're like, okay, well, this happened in my hometown. I'm like, well, tell me about your hometown. Tell me, where you're from. What is it like there? Who are the people that live there? And you just ask them these questions. And by asking questions, they begin to go back in their head to what it was like to grow up wherever they grew up, to what it's like to grow up in a suburb outside of Sydney, or in the northern part of England, and why everybody there has a a Staffordshire accent or whatever it is, and it begins to create the differences between it begins to narrow the gap between what they experienced and what I have, whatever pre-installed software I'm coming into. And when you begin to ask those questions, people immediately begin to see the importance of it, and then they see how it's more effective.
Do you feel like a lot of people struggle with the vulnerability aspect? Because obviously,
I do.
Yeah. Sure.
Less so now. I think that when I began sharing content on the internet, which was I had my first ever article published back in 2002, but let's move ahead to the influx of business and social media where that union began. So let's call that 2009 in the Gary Vee era. That was 11 years ago. And between then and now, we have seen a tremendous push toward vulnerability, especially in the past couple of years. But there is still great reticence in terms of people wanting to share their individual story. And the way that I help people break that down is asking them, what are you afraid of? What are you afraid is going to happen if you share this? What type of judgment? And the secret is this, Simon. You do not take anyone and have them go from 0 to 60 or 0 to 100. You don't take someone who, like me, for example, has presented as this outwardly strong, nerdy, ripped, muscular bro and jump right into, also, I grew up in a house where I was being sexually abused by an uncle. That is a tremendous leap. Yeah. And so the way that you begin to help people feel okay with being vulnerable is help them understand that it's not like flipping a switch. It is climbing stairs. It is a slow erosion of resistance, and it's repeated exposure and gathering evidence. I can share this thing that feels on a 1 to 10 scale like a 2. It feels 2 out of 10 scary. And then you look around and you say, like, okay, well, nothing bad happened. And then eventually you start sharing things that are 5 out of 10 scary, 6 out of 10 scary. And instead of something bad happens, what you will invariably see is people then begin to reach out to you. Right at 5 or 6 out of 10 scary, people reach out and they're like, thank you for sharing this. This helped me. I went through something similar. And there have been a couple of giant touchstones for me and for many, many of my clients. But in 2015, when I published my piece on mental health, it was about my lifelong struggle with depression and suicide. That was very scary for me. At that time, it felt like a 8 out of 10. But it radically changed the entire trajectory of my career. Through that, I became a mental health advocate simply because people kept sharing it and saying, this person is explaining it in a way that's better than I could. And for me, being able to know that sharing this terrifying thing was helping people made it feel not just okay, not just safe, but important to share the next scary thing and the next scary thing. And so you just walk people through this process, these steps, and slowly walk them up this winding staircase to whatever the pinnacle of their terror of exposure is.
I think from my own experience with this, I can remember there was a period where I used to like create a piece of content, a blog or whatever it was, or an email. And you go like that vulnerable with it, you felt like you're going to be sick as soon as you hit send. It was like, oh,
yeah.
Throw up all over the keyboard.
Yeah, absolutely. But
yeah. The biggest thing that I realized with that, in those moments of doing that, like extreme vulnerability or exposure, it ended up being one of the most freeing experiences. And I think it really did kind of put a vertical incline on my creativity, because I was like, do you know what? You shatter your own glass ceilings, don't you? The more that you keep breaking that fear barrier within your own creativity and writing.
Right. Because we are mostly unaware of how constrained we are. And there's so many things that you want to write about or want to share or want to put out there that don't really make sense without the context of people knowing this incredibly scary thing. And once you share the scary thing, now you have the opportunity to think, oh, here's 5 other things that are not scary, but in order for them to have made sense to the reader, the depression thing needed to be out there. And so it frees you, because now you're not worried about, how do I tweak this content, this story, to make sense without this piece. Imagine if you tried to tell the story of Batman without revealing that his parents had been killed, right? Like Bruce Wayne's, and the entirety of his life comes from this one moment of his childhood trauma where he sees his parents murdered in front of him. Imagine if you tried to explain Batman to someone and you were constantly living in fear of, I'm not going to talk about the fact that his parents were murdered. Nothing would make sense, and so you could share almost nothing about Batman. Nothing about it would be compelling. Nothing about it would be real. Nothing about it would make sense. He's just a rich guy beating up criminals. And most of us have known rich people in our lives. And we're like, why would he do that? Why doesn't he just go drive cars? And do what other rich guy, just do some rich guy shit. And once you reveal this thing about his parents being killed, now you can reveal, and that drove him in this way. And it's the same thing in all of our stories. Whatever the scary thing is that we're holding back because we fear the world will judge us for it or punish us for it, once we put that out there, and I know that is easier said than done, but whatever it is and however scary it is, whenever you feel comfortable doing that, once you put that out there, the rest of your story makes sense and it begins to fall into place. And so many of my clients have, just through working with me and being able to tell their stories more effectively, have broken through trauma about their parents, have realized I have been carrying all this guilt around, I can't relate to I've worked with women coaches who are women and who coach other women, but they can't really connect with their clients because they are carrying around this resentment for their older sister, and working through that and just being able to talk about how they had trouble forming relationships with women, and they are working with women because that's what they think women coaches are supposed to do. So the revelation, it comes from erosion, and then you can jump in. But the leap is scary. The plunge is terrifying. But then when you come up for air, everything feels better.
Exactly. With this sort of stuff, because obviously a lot of our audience will be people who are either looking to build audience, maybe take a bit of a leap of faith and maybe start putting themselves out there. Do you have any kind of like core fundamental pillars or like structures which are for content, for story production, for getting a message across? Is there something that just like a tick off list or like a 3-point, if you cover these, it'll hit?
All right. So there's a few different ways we can do this. But let's assume that the audience has an option for how they're going to produce content. Some people listening will be writing content. Others listening maybe doing podcasting and have audio content that way. And still others will be doing video. And so I'll give the more general answer. There are a lot of storytelling processes, and they're all great. The one that has been the most impactful to me has been the hero's journey stuff from Joseph Campbell. But if you are doing content, if you're using storytelling for content and for sales, you really only need to think about 5 things. And this is my 5-step story procedure. There has to be a frame, a hook, a turn, a dive, and a payoff. The frame is the set and setting. Where is this happening? When is it happening? Helping people see themselves there. The hook is what's in it for them. Why are they listening to it? And we could talk more about each of these. A turn in a story is anything that drives action. If you do not have friction in a story, you don't have a story. You have a list of things that happened. And when people are telling stories, they forget that things don't just happen. They happen for a reason. There's causality. Often when people are giving content, it's just this and then this and then this and then this. And that is sequence. Sequence is no good. What you want is consequence. So it just means sequence as a result. And things happen because something made them happen, or in spite of something else. So when you're joining scenes together, use either a but or a because. Things need to happen because that creates friction. Dive is detail. The dive is when can you spend a little extra time giving them, whether it's a callback to something you mentioned previously, whether it is a reference to something that expands their mind, whether it's a quote in a story, whether it is an inside joke, just something that pulls them in a little deeper and rewards them for sticking this long. And the payoff is at the end, did they get something out of it? Did they learn the thing? The payoff has to relate back to the hook, right? If you ask me, John, where are you from? You asked me, like, tell us about your story. You asked me where I was from. And I didn't just say I'm from Long Island and expect you to know. I had my whole little thing about, like, this is who's from Long Island and this is what it is. But ultimately the payoff is now you know about me. So the payoff has to relate back to the hook. The dive usually, goes back to the frame, and the turn just brings the turns just move the story forward. So as long as you are writing anything, There has to be a reason people want to hear it. What's in it for them? That's the hook. There has to be a place where all this is happening. That's the frame. There has to be things that are happening driving the action. That's the turn. There has to be detail. The richness, texture. That's the dive. And finally, the payoff is, did they get what they wanted? Is there something? Was there an evocation of emotion? Was there emotional enhancement in some way? Were they enlightened with information? Were they educated with knowledge? Were they emboldened to take action? Were they empowered to then make changes in their life?
Yeah. I'd love to know from this as well. We've touched upon the hero's journey thing, and this has been something which I've heard, I've seen, we spoke about.
Sure.
And I've seen some extremely powerful content from you. And I'd love to know what is your own hero's journey, because from the content I've seen you put out, it's remarkable, and I'd love to get that on here as well. I think it would be a great example as well for what we've just been speaking about.
The hero's journey is a universal model of storytelling, and it was not invented by anyone. It was discovered and codified. And so there was firstly, some of this goes back to Vladimir Propp, who was a mythologist and a folklorist in, I believe, Germany. But the person most well known for being connected to the hero's journey is a comparative mythologist named Joseph Campbell, who taught at Sarah Lawrence University. And he codified the hero's journey, or the monomyth, in his seminal work, The Hero with a Thousand Faces. And Campbell looked at myths across cultures, and in doing so, focused on where they converged rather than where they diverged. And what he found was that every culture had these stories that followed more or less the same pattern. There was a hero in what was called the ordinary world, and then there was a call to adventure or inciting event, something that revealed more out there, so the call of destiny. Then there's usually refusal of the call. And this applies to the Karate Kid, it applies to Dorothy Gale and the Wizard of Oz, it applies to Harry Potter and King Arthur and Frodo Baggins, it applies to
all of the greats.
But to Jesus Christ and Horus and Mishra, and everyone. And the thing is this: we don't tell stories this way just because that's the way it's done, or just because it's an effective way to tell stories. This is how we've always told stories, and some people have found the commonalities. And the reason we tell stories this way is because it is how we are able to see ourselves in them, and then it's how we are able to process the information and remember it. But it's, again, as I mentioned earlier, it's how our brains work. So when we go through something like a death, so the ordinary world is this person in your life is alive. Then there is an inciting event. They die. Then the first thing that happens, the first stage of, when you're talking about the 5 stages of grief, the first one is denial.
Yeah.
And so that is refusal of the call. And then eventually, there's bargaining, which is very much like crossing the first threshold, where you begin to realize this thing is happening. Then there's anger, which is it's being in the ordeal. Depression is acceptance towards the end of the journey, or the depression is all the consequences that happen as a result of going through the journey. And then finally, acceptance is the end, the master of two worlds. And so it is how we process these major life events in our own life. And the hero's journey can be applied to starting a business, to getting married, to getting divorced. It can be applied to having a child. We are at any given time going through the macro hero's journey of our lives, but simultaneously we are probably going through one of a dozen micro cycles. And so when you ask me, what is my hero's journey, it really depends. Like, what thing are you asking about? Because any change that I go through in my life, any change that you go through in your life, will follow the same path. And so if we're just looking at something recent in terms of a big change that I underwent, was I wrote this entire piece on ego death and how I went through this major ego restructuring. And so for me, the ordinary world was being the person who I was, and all of the different ways that was affecting me, believing these things about myself, whatever they were. And then the call to adventure, the inciting event, was that I had a series of depressive episodes, and I wound up like excising a lot of people from my life, and I underwent this journey where I had a lot of mentors, and I used a lot of psychedelics or entheogens, plant medicines, and but I refused the call several times. Several times I did not. The ego, and by the way, when I say ego, for anyone who doesn't know, I just want people to realize that is the part of the psyche that recognizes itself as an individual, you as a person. Ego is actually the Latin word for I, and so it protects itself. I am not. Even when you experience ego death, you then have an ego rebirth, meaning you yourself, the person you think of I, has come back as a new person, and in some regard. And
so would you say is it identity death, identity rebirth?
Exactly. That's a really good way to put. Yeah, it's the way you relate to your past experiences. Yeah. And so obviously, like, my history didn't change. I'm still the person who was born on Long Island and achieved the things I've achieved, and has gone through the abuses that I've gone through, and has done the things that I've done. But in the ego restructuring, by going through all of this inner work, whether it's through plant medicines or whether it is through therapy, I am no longer the person who I don't feel the same way about those things. And if the recipe for the person who presents outwardly to the world is the baseline information of your experience, but also the software interacting with that hardware, with that programming, then that software has changed fundamentally. I got a software alteration. I don't want to say upgrade, but I got a software alteration, and now I'm no longer as angry. I really, like, some of the things that I used to love, I don't care about it anymore. Some things that used to scare me no longer do. Everything about me has changed, and so that experience, it was a hero's journey, and now I've come out on the other side. And so every major life change we go through, and many of the minor ones, those will all follow the model of the monomyth. And so, for a person to sort of put down the totality of their life into a single version, like the ordinary world was the womb, and the inciting event is you were born. And then the call to adventure is, or rather the refusal of the call is all the ways you didn't want to grow up. And so, it's easier to put them to smaller things, like going through a fitness transformation or starting a business or getting out of a relationship, but they're happening all the time. And it's really a beautiful model for understanding how we are making these changes as we're making them.
I love that way of looking at it. It's like the hero still is on his journey, but it's also, are you, the people listening, calling your own inner hero to step up as well?
Right. And so the people listening, you the hero in your own story, are going through one massive journey, which we call life. But along the way, you will go on any number of quests. And each one of these quests will follow that same model. And so if right now you are contemplating, I really don't know your audience as well as I would need to really make this, to dive in and get this, but let's say you're contemplating either starting a new business or pivoting in your business. Pivoting is a big one, right?
So that'd be a big one for our audience.
You're pivoting. Your ordinary world is you're running your business now, and it's going however it's going. It's probably going reasonably well. You're making money, but you're not entirely happy. There's something else calling you. You want to be doing something else. Maybe you were in an industry and now you're no longer interested in it. Maybe things have changed. Maybe you want to get out of, just doing marketing and get more into branding. Maybe you want to start a podcast, whatever it is. That you're being called in some way emotionally. And this podcast that you're listening to right now, this is the inciting event where I am saying to you, you have the option to do this. Simon is saying, through his content and the books that he recommends and the content that he creates, he is serving as your de facto guide, your mentor, your Gandalf, your Obi-Wan, your Dumbledore, your Mr. Miyagi, your Glinda the Good Witch. There's this archetype there. But what's going to happen is you're not going to do it. And that's okay. Some of you will. Many of you will make the pivot. You will get out of fitness and into business coaching, or you'll get out of, the digital marketing space and into, maybe SaaS marketing, or maybe you'll go into creating physical products. But many of you won't. Many of you are going to sit on the dream for a long while. And that's refusal of the call. And then something will happen in any great story. Whenever the hero refuses the call, the universe conspires to set things aright. And in the case of Luke Skywalker, Luke said, he found R2. On R2 plays the recording. Help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi. You're my only hope. And then he goes and finds Ben Kenobi and Ben says, you must come with me to Alderaan and rescue the princess, and etc. And Luke says, I can't go with you to Alderaan. And he gives the world's lamest excuse. I have to help my aunt and uncle on this farm. And then the universe conspires to remove that obstacle, right? Like, Luke needs to stay on the farm. Okay, Luke goes back to his farm. His aunt and uncle have been killed, and the farm is burned down, and now he doesn't have to stay anymore. Now, in storytelling, in movies and books, drama is, in a very way, hyperbole. It's this exaggerated message. In real life, if you refuse the call, if you listen to this podcast and at the end of it, whatever it is that's calling to you that you want to do and you decide not to do it, your family is not going to get murdered. You're not going to go bankrupt. But what will happen is worse than that. It is just as tragic. It is nothing. Nothing will change. You will stay exactly where you are. And only when that gets painful that you can't take it anymore will you then answer the call. So in drama, whether it's books or films or plays, whenever the hero refuses the call, the universe conspires to remove the obstacle in a very dramatic way. In real life, usually you will sit in it and you'll sit in this quagmire of self-doubt, and something will happen where you will cross the first threshold and you will get on a sales call or a discovery call or a strategy call or some kind of DM conversation with me or with Simon or someone else who can help you do the thing that you want to do. And in that call, if you're ready, the universe will conspire to remove the obstacle. And in most cases, that obstacle is you and your self-doubt. You and your worry about the financial aspect of the commitment, you and your worry about, what if I fail? All of those things, that we're going to remove that stuff where, this proverbial farm, this thing that you hate. Luke didn't want to be a farmer. He didn't want to be working on moisture evaporators. He wanted to go and join the rebellion with Vix and Wedge. And that's what it is. And then you have to undergo the rest of the journey. So for every single person, every change you make, every decision that you think about making follows the same thing. And when I teach storytelling workshops, I have people go through this for starting a relationship, for ending a relationship. I have people, one of my favorite things, if you search hero's journey and nose job, you will find a beautiful graphic that a plastic surgeon has created, taking his prospective client through the exact 12-phase step of the hero's journey, step by step, of what they go through outwardly and inwardly when they're about to undergo rhinoplasty, when they're considering it and when they finally get it. So it applies to everything.
I love how you have just said that. In my head then, I could correlate that to so many different stories and pivotal moments in my own life. I was just sat there going, yep. But one of the biggest things that I really kind of like to drive home with you, really, with this, and also with yourself being a mental health advocate, I think we can kind of knit a few things here together. Sure. Before we mentioned about the whole identity crisis or the identity breakdown to the rebuild, and I've always found with people maybe getting new into business or something like that, you do have to drop an identity and rebuild what is new and what will be. And it's always that recovery process in the middle. And I know when I'm sat here and just listening to what you were saying, and then I was going through my own little hero's journey, I was like, shit, that was that middle gap of not knowing, the unknown, of the waters, or even at the beginning stages where I was ignoring the call-in and the universal clap was getting louder and louder and louder and harder and more painful until something snapped. And I think one of the biggest things I see here when I'm looking at psychology and mental health, and obviously this part, I think this is the majority of the time where a lot of us get stuck, is either we ignore the call into the point of pain and still keep ignoring, or we then get into the middle ground and it's like oh shit, now what?
And the reason that happens is I think that having an intimate knowledge of the hero's journey, I think everybody should print out the monomyth, the hero's journey cycle, and just wherever you work, wherever you just paste it on the wall. Because what happens is there are very, very few things in life that have to be done in a pretty specific sequence, but it turns out nearly everything does. for example, you can't, if you apply the hero's journey to like getting out of a bad relationship, right? You have to like go through the part of the relationship where you're mourning. If you just try to skip that and just jump into another relationship, that has like never worked out for anybody in the history of anything. But we do that. So what happens is people wait and they ignore the call to adventure until it's too loud to ignore. There's the old aphorism,
screaming in your face.
Right. It's like we only change when the pain of staying the same is too great. And we wait, and so most people, like, even after it's too great, we just keep waiting. We keep waiting. It's terrible. But then it finally happens. And then we've stayed in this terrible place, this terrible circumstance for so long that now you just run screaming away from it without a plan. And that is usually when people begin to fail. It's so interesting that, like, really when you sit down with anyone, when you help them build their business, particularly if they're starting their first business and money is a big concern for them, or when I was a fitness coach and helping people go through those transformations, or now that I'm doing personal development work, everybody thinks that they want to go from point A to point B. The truth is, point B is almost irrelevant. What happens is most people just want to get as far from point A as humanly possible, as quickly as possible. And when you do that, you lose the ability. When you wait so long that now all you can do is rush headlong into the future, you lose the ability to learn from the past, to discern the present. And if you don't have an awareness of the hero's journey, you'll skip the steps. You'll just be like, I'm going to skip finding a mentor. I'm going to skip the phase of tests, allies, and enemies. I'm going to, which means like I don't have a good support system around me. I don't have a good crew around me. I'm just going to try and do everything on my own. I don't have guidance. You're stumbling around in the dark, and you cannot go from step 3 in the hero's journey, refusal of the call, to step 8 of the hero's journey, which is the ordeal. But that's what so many people do, because they don't have awareness of it, because they've stayed so long in the misery of their situation that now they're just running and they're missing all the signposts. So what I always tell people is, whenever you've made a decision to do something, find one person who you can talk to about it. Now, whenever anyone talks about this and whenever anyone says the exact shit that I'm saying right now, I understand that there's a subset of people who are just like, here's a guy who makes money with coaching and consulting, trying to foster this idea that everybody needs a coach because the more people buying coaching, the more likely he is. And like, that's not untrue to some respect, but you don't have to fucking pay. Just buy a fucking book. Like, buy a fucking book for $16 that will help you solve your problem. Find a support group for free. Whatever it is, find a person or a group of people who have done something similar or who have gone through something similar, and simply don't do it alone. If at the very least you have some support, you'll be helped. But more than support, often you'll have a plan and you'll know the next thing to do. So again, this isn't just some coach up here being like, yeah, everyone needs coaching, coaches need coaches. I don't do a lot of coaching and consulting anymore. I do it for brands, and if like Nike doesn't want to hire me, that's fine. But the main thing is, like, if you have the option to communicate with all of the smartest people that have ever lived. Like, most of the most brilliant people in the world have written books about the thing on which they were experts. You have all of the world's collected knowledge at your fingertips. So please spend some time in the library, spend some time in the stacks, like, learn what to do. Don't just sprint ahead. Find something to give you some guidance. That is the big thing. So yeah, whenever people wait too long, then they try to make up lost time. And I think that within the entrepreneurial community, there's a lot of romanticism about the like ready, fire, aim thing, and like build it. Like, yeah, take messy action, but like take it in the right direction. Because,
Yeah, stumble. I think the beauty of books is, and continual learning is, even though it is the unknown, you still get some form of foresight as to where the target actually lies, and you can stumble your way towards it. In a nutshell. Yeah, 100%. I was going to say, from this sort of stuff then, obviously with the mental health and all that side of stuff, we touched up before on plant medicines. Now, this is, and psychedelics. Now, this is a world for me which is I think it's phenomenal. The stories which I'm seeing from people with PTSDs, depressions, and stuff like that, where it's shown them the bits that they need to go and work on, and then it's the integration processes. I fully understand that you guys have just gone and done this yourselves, and I'd love to know from a man who's fresh out, still with baby face, a bit, is how was your own experience with it, and was there anything that came up for you, or was shown, or?
Yes. So let me qualify this. So what Simon is talking about is my partner Amanda and I recently did an ayahuasca retreat at a place called Soltara Healing Center in Costa Rica. Now, by the time this podcast airs, on Amanda's podcast, Bucci Radio, we will have already aired the breakdown of the entire process, and so it was 2 hours of conversation, so there are 2 episodes. So if you're really interested in the depths of it, go check that out. I will give you an abridged version here, but for the purposes of setting context, I want to do 2 things. First, I want to let everyone know that although I think that everything can be casual, nothing should be cavalier, which is to say that I'm going to speak very casually about my experiences with drugs and substances, but I'm only doing that because I've spent a ton of time learning and researching and speaking to world-class professionals and doctors. The other thing is I want to create some context for my own experience with substances in general. So because I grew up in a house where drugs were used and it facilitated and really fostered the abuse that was happening there. I went my entire life not doing drugs. I didn't even drink alcohol until I was 26 years old. I'm now 37. And I never smoked a cigarette in high school or college. I've still never smoked a cigarette. I've never smoked weed, actually smoked it. I didn't combust anything. It wasn't until I was 33 years old and I was living in California where everything is legal. I was working with a therapist who said, please, for the love of God, for your nighttime anxiety, will you just get some edible cannabis? And so my first experience with drugs was only 4 years ago, where I was like, all right, I don't want to smoke anything, but I can eat this gummy bear. All right, I can do a gummy bear. But what happened was I found myself at a wedding with a couple of luminaries. I'm going to drop some names here, and I apologize, but I was with it was at Ryan Holiday's wedding, and so there was
amazing.
There was Tucker. Yeah, so it was Ryan Holiday's wedding. Ryan is a good friend of mine, and it was his wedding in Austin, Texas. And in attendance was Tim Ferriss and Aubrey Marcus and Tucker Max and Lewis Howes. And so it's an interesting split of information. Lewis is a teetotaler to this day. He's had exactly 2 sips of alcohol, so that's and no drugs ever. So it's really interesting. Tim at that point was funding research to study the use of mushrooms to treat depression and PTSD. And Aubrey Marcus, who is the founder of On It, if people don't know, Aubrey is a big plant medicine advocate. And so I realized that I had no experience with these substances, but I was letting my relationship with my abusive father kind of control me and push me away from trying these things, which might be able to help me, because I had association between, quote, drugs, which in my father's case was cocaine, not ayahuasca. So that began the breakdown for me, where I began to think there might be something here. And so I began a pretty deep dive over the next couple of years into plant medicines, and I did a couple of mushroom ceremonies, pretty high dose, with a medicine man that I found in New York.
Psilocybin?
Through a mutual psilocybin, yes. Yeah. Magic mushroom, psilocybin. So through a connection through a mutual friend, I was able to get connected with a person who works at a lab at a major university in the United States, where they're producing MDMA to treat PTSD. And so my entire experience with all of this stuff is very academic and very directed. And I'm never going to tell you that I haven't used MDMA at a party, but I'm going to tell you that the first time I did it, it was in a ceremony. I've done a number of mushroom ceremonies and DMT ceremonies, and then fast forward to December of 2019, Amanda and I were invited by the good people of Soltara to go over and do an ayahuasca ceremony. And so this was the first time that I was doing something with ayahuasca, which is very powerful plant medicine. It was also the first time that I was doing anything multi-day. And so all of my experiences historically have been a little bit less structured, and it's like, I'm going to take this psilocybin in this group of people. This is like, you're going to do ayahuasca 3 days in a row with all of these shamans or maestros around you. So very, very different in its structure, in the ceremonial nature of it, in its solemnity and the seriousness and the severity of it. And because of that, it had an entirely different effect. My experience was really interesting. The first night I saw a lot of very hard stuff. I went in thinking that I was going to see a lot of stuff about my childhood abuse, so that I was going to see, relive a lot of that trauma, and I didn't. Instead, I saw all the places in my life where I had failed, where I had been unkind or dishonest, all the times when I didn't do the things I had said I was going to do, all the places I had let people down, and most importantly, let myself down. And that was really challenging. I came out of that experience feeling really, really down on myself. And then the next day, I was shown my strength, and I relived all of these the highlights that we talked about earlier, the best-selling book and all the accolades. I relived all of these moments of success and triumph. And on the third night, so the first night I was shown my weakness, the second night I was shown my strength, and on the third night I was shown the truth. And the truth is always somewhere in the middle. I am not this horrible person who is made entirely of flaws and mistakes that I have made. I am not defined entirely by the mistakes that I've made, but neither am I this person who has never fucked up. Neither am I this person who is just a series of highlight quotes that you put on your bio to make people want to work with you. I'm not just a New York Times best-selling author who's had 7-figure businesses. I'm also a guy who is struggling often to write, is struggling to do the things that I say I'm going to do. I'm no longer the guy who was like a 26-year-old fitness model in the pinnacle of human condition. I'm a guy who struggles to make it to the gym 2 or 3 times a week because I'm so busy doing these other, quote, busy. I am making all these excuses. And so when I say I saw the truth, I was able to see my life in a totally objective way and see, here are all these reasons why I'm not progressing in the areas I want to, and none of it is unfair. I'm getting exactly the results I should be getting for the amount of work and effort and energy I'm putting into it, and I have to be ready to make some of these changes if I want things to change. And so since I got back from the ayahuasca trip, I have trained 4 or 5 days a week, and it's simple things like that. That's the easiest example I can give you. But instead of sitting there and being oh, I'm a person who's an author, it's no, I'm actually now I'm writing every day again, and I've increased my content production, and just there was a lot of things I wasn't doing, and it made what was happening or not happening in my life feel like it was at odds with the person that I thought that I was. And that was huge. It was huge for me. I really think that when you are stripped of ego, when there's this ego dissolution, you don't have any choice but to experience it. The other thing about ayahuasca, everybody asks it, yes, I puked. Many people, you purge. I don't know. That's not a challenge for me. You sweat, you purge, you blow snot out of your face. Some people get very sick. Some people need to run to use the bathroom, and
it's a messy experience.
I didn't have any super horrible stuff. I just I would be oh yeah, I guess I got to puke, and then I would puke, and then I would be done. Other people sat in nausea for a very, very long time. Overall, my experience at Soltara was very positive. It was challenging, but I would recommend the process of using entheogens to anyone who is ready to look at their shit and do some work. I wouldn't say that you have to go to Peru or go to Costa Rica or Brazil or wherever else to do ayahuasca in a jungle. That is, I feel like that's a higher level stuff. If you have access to reputable people in your life who have a lot of experience with something gentler like psilocybin, I would say start there. But my goal here is not to advocate for drug use. My goal here is to simply say it has been helpful to me. It is truly a beautiful experience, and I think just about anyone can get something out of it. A great thing to check out is, so I mentioned Tucker Max earlier. Tucker's a good friend of mine. When we were at Ryan's wedding, to that point, Tucker had no experience with a lot of this stuff. And a couple of years later, he did some guided MDMA therapy and wrote a beautiful piece about it. So if you're looking for more information on this, Aubrey Marcus has written about it extensively. He has had a lot of podcasts about it. Amanda and I recorded 2 episodes on her podcast on Bucci Radio, and then Tucker Max for his MDMA journeys. So I'm happy to answer any questions to you, Simon. Obviously, I'm here for it. We can go as deep as you want, but like
I want to go into your experience. That's the first thing. But before that, just on what John was speaking about, is do the research on it, and if you feel called to it, then maybe that's your call to adventure. But John, you mentioned something before, and I've gone through a similar experience with the label that we embed in ourselves that creates a shitload of pressure to live up to. And you just summed this up so perfectly, and you just set something going in my own brain there. Was when I had something that was very similar, and I felt like there was overwhelm, pressure, and anxiety. I'd done exactly the same thing to yourself, where I'd created these labels of I've got to live up to this person and show up as this identity, this person who can't be human. And I never made way for the fact that I am human, and that I will make an error. And in the smallest fraction, if I ever did make a little stumble or a fraction, I used to beat myself up for weeks, months, and it was an amazing amount of pressure for any human to carry. But it was also the thing that was being the biggest anchor for me slingshotting forwards. And I was going to say, it was just amazing to hear you mention that was the thing that came up for you, was the amount of pressure and anxiety it causes is trying to live up to the perfect label, period.
I think that perfectionism and all the pressure that we put on ourselves, particularly as high achievers or whatever that means, it's like I had to sit with a lot of this stuff. Like, what if, like, I think that you buy into this entrepreneurial narrative and this myth of your own greatness and this terrifying feeling. Like, what if this is it? Like, what if I never get back to where I was? Because I've changed industries and because I am living a more of a lifestyle business. Like, there was a point in 2015 where my income was literally twice what it is now, which means that comparatively my income is half. I still make what I think is like an obscene amount of money for doing shit that I love. It is absurd what we get to do. I get to like stand in front of a room and teach people storytelling, and they pay me like $2,000 or $3,000 a person, and there's 10 people in there. I'm making $20,000, $25,000 today to like do something I just fucking love it. I fucking love it. It's amazing. I get to talk about Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter, and like teach people how to build their businesses and the life of their dreams and how they can use it to get over trauma. It's fucking unreal. And compared to like the poor kid I was from Long Island who like grew up on welfare, it's absurd. But there was still this reference point in the back of my head to this point where I was making like, where I had like a $3.2 million year. And I'm like, and I had to sit with it in my ayahuasca. What if I never get back there? What if this is it? What if this is where I stay? Is that okay? Am I okay with that? And there was a lot of behaviors that I can take to be like, I can change that. But just sitting with it and being like, does that make me? What if I am okay with it? If I'm okay with never growing my income any more than it is now, or never growing my brand any more than it is now, am I okay with this? Does that make me mediocre? Am I a person who is settling for average, or am I a person who is stepping off of the treadmill of it's never going to be enough? And I haven't come up with an answer to that yet, but that question was powerful, and I think we all need to ask it, like, what is enough? Like, when is enough? For me, I decided a long time ago that like the money was no longer the motivator. I wanted to create great stuff and help people.
Sorry, I was going to say, do you feel if the external enoughness, so to speak, it's more of a sign that you're yourself aren't enough, and as soon as you kind of get at peace or accept that, you know what, then it stops that chase mentality?
I think that we've all got things that drive us, right? I think money is such a weird thing because at some point, like if you're doing like, I mean, I could name 100,000 entrepreneurs who can teach you how to make $100,000. And like, that's a mild example, but I could off the top of my head, I could name probably 50 people. Between the two of us, we could name 100 people who can help the average person build a six-figure business, which means there's a lot of people running around who can help you make 100K. When I was growing up, the idea of making 100K was absurd. And like now it's like, okay, I couldn't live on 100K in New York City or LA, but like, do I need to live here? Do I, So what happens is that money at some point becomes so embedded in the conversation and the culture of what we do that it isn't just currency, it's also a scorekeeping mechanism. It's a way that we measure how well things are going, not just in the business overall, but on any given promotion. And so detaching from it, I think, is as important as possible, because it will never be enough. Like, you'll always find a reason for more. I was very, very fortunate that like in 2011 I had this epiphany where I was like, well, if my income doubled, my life wouldn't change. I'd drive the same car, I'd do the same things, I'd live in the same place, and that's a really great place to get to. And so my metric for decision making at that point became like the book, writing the big, Now it's a little different. If my income doubled, my life would not appreciably change, because like I make more than I need, but it's still less than half of, or it's about half of what I used to make. So if I woke up tomorrow and I got back there, would it change my life? Like, no. I don't need it, but I guess there's a part of me that's like, well, I could use it to help the world more than I do now. But I think that when you start like getting into your own self-development and you like think about the type of life that you want, like, what are you going to do with all that money? That's a lot of responsibility, man. For me, the thing is legacy. I want to create good art. And when I got so wound up in trying to make more money that all I did was worry about conversions and sales, and I wasn't writing beautiful sentences anymore, that's not for me. Because at the end of my life, and I only get one so far as I know, but at the end of my life, I would much rather have it said of me, he wrote a few great books and changed a lot of lives, than he had really sick fucking funnels, like just really high converting funnels. Like, that's, So
it's funny. It's like what you were saying then. It was a case where you were getting further and further away from your true self. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
And it was like, nope.
But I never advise anyone not to do that, because you have to. Because sometimes the only thing that like really helps you understand the depth of your core value is going somewhere else. You have to go through that trial by fire and live through it to be like, oh, okay, like there's nothing there. There's so many pieces of advice that, like you and I being in the positions that we are, having successful businesses, we all are always asked questions like, what would you tell your 20-year-old self? I wouldn't tell that asshole anything, because he wouldn't fucking listen to me. Because there's so many things that you simply cannot be told. Because if you are, you're just gonna find it out. You have to find it out for yourself. And so whatever it is, I'm never gonna tell an entrepreneur who comes to me and wants to work with me to increase their conversions, that's not actually what you want. What you need is to just feel better about yourself, because the only way that they have to get that level of achievement, and then once they've gotten there, it will either fulfill something for them or it won't. And if it does, great, I'm happy to have helped. And if it doesn't, great, I'm happy to have helped, because now you can figure out the next thing. The key is to constantly be auditing yourself and asking yourself these questions. Am I happier? Is this better? Does this feel right? Because if you don't do that, then you never get off the treadmill of the never enoughness. Then you're constantly chasing the next thing and the next thing. And then you hear people like me or whomever talk about happiness and stillness, and you just think they're completely full of shit. And there are going to be a lot of people who listen to this and think like, this guy's full of shit. And then 5 years from now, you'll think about this interview and that guy, and wherever, you'll see some book that I wrote sometime.
God damn that John.
You go back and like, he's like, oh, all right. But it's cool. It's cool, man, because you can't, you're just not ready to receive it. And I don't know what the meaning of life is, but I am 100% certain that it has a lot more to do with love and community and just like trying not to hate yourself than it does about trying to figure out a way to get other people to hate themselves so that they buy a product from you.
I think at the root of it, we deep down know. I think somehow in our subconscious, our intuition, primal excitement gauges, whatever the hell you want to call it, we already kind of know what our meaning of life is. And I think it's our own hero's journey that has to have the courage to go and fucking follow it. And I think it's only when you start doing those things, then you start navigating your own purpose and your own meaning and living your own life with your own intention. And that's just me speaking for my own thing. But
no, I think you're absolutely right. And to kind of close the loop on Campbell, one of his most famous quotes is, "The cave you fear to enter holds the treasure that you seek." And I don't think that means everyone who's afraid of something should go do that thing immediately. But I think that, asking yourself what adventure, what piece, what journey, what aspect of this thing is scaring me? What part of me is it scaring? And how do I figure it out? And if you're not sure, get some help figuring it out, because a lot of people, and I think this is the next phase. If you guys are listening for business insight, and I've been now in this industry for 12 years, and I've made quite a lot of money and done a lot of things. I've done all the things. I had the book, I had the big business, and yada yada. I have all the networks, and but if you're looking for the next phase, the next cycle, the next evolution of where the online business industry goes, particularly the coaching industry, right now, there's a lot of people making a lot of money, as they should be, but helping other people solve their problems. And I think that's great. I think coaching to get help with what you need is really good. But I think the next phase is going to be more people getting guidance on what else can I need. I think as coaches, as industry professionals, as teachers, everybody thinks that their job is something, but that it isn't. Everybody in their Instagram bio has, "I help 6-figure coaches scale to 7." No. What your job is, what all of our jobs are, is to help people get from one level on Maslow's hierarchy of needs to the next level in some area of their lives. That's
fully
it.
Agree.
And so right now, like, you're helping people with food, shelter, water, and community, whatever it is, but there's going to be this influx of really, really great people who are going to be helping people figure out how to just get people ready to start approaching self-development and self-actualization. There's going to be all of these people who aren't claiming to be perfect, claiming to be gurus, claiming to be at the top level of enlightenment. They're just going to be realistically 1 or 2 steps ahead of the public in terms of saying, like, here's some shit that I think you can do to help you. And I think that what we're seeing, particularly with amazing people like Dr. Nicole Perla, the holistic psychologist, is that within the sphere of treatment of the mind, we have really been missing the boat for quite a while. And there's all of these other modalities that can help us. The first stage of that is going to be revealing the deeper issues that we need to work with, and then working through those. And I'm very happy to have a very, very small role in being part of that conversation. But more than anything else, I just want to help people understand that their story is important, because it's the one thing we all have. It's the one thing that we can all share. Whenever you meet anyone at an airport, you might not be able to give them advice to fix their business. You might not, but you can give them the gift of presence. You can listen to their story, and you can share your own. And that is the heart of human connection. And it is the one thing that we can all give each other.
I love that. I think another big thing to realize as well is a lot of the time we expect the story to be quite easy, or we expect life to be quite easy. And I always love saying this. I always love saying this is like, if you actually got to the end of your life and you had your biography, it'd be a fucking boring story if it was easy all the way through. So
yeah. There's got to be turns. Without friction, there's no fire. Without fire, there's no point. And so there's got to be conflict, for lack of a better word. There have to be I love Neil Gaiman, who is a brilliant storyteller. If you don't read Neil Gaiman, please do. But he said the most beautiful thing about stories is that they tell us that not just that dragons are real, but that dragons can be beaten.
Exactly. I think again this is why I love Jordan Peterson's work, because he's all about go what is your dragon that needs to be slayed that will give you what it is that you're after on your own journey. I love how you've just summed that up. Perfect. John, look, I want to respect your time, because obviously I know it's late where you are in the world, but just a couple of quick questions to round up on.
Sure.
You yourself have got an amazing journey. I really wish we could have longer to kind of like go all in on you and XYZ, but no doubt there'll be more in the future. If you could place a message out, because obviously you've gone through a lot personally within business, XYZ, you name it, you've done a lot. But if you could literally get a message out to everyone in the world who knows there is more, or knows that they're capable of doing more, or in chase of their potential, what would be just one message that you'd put out, what everyone could hear it from your own experiences?
I think if there's one message, I mean, that I think at least I'm a practical person, so I would probably want to hone in on the message that that I think people would be most receptive to, and it is you can always find a kind way to tell a hard truth, and I think that so much of life comes down to the difficult conversations we need to have, and I think that and this is something, and I don't mean to sound like some like drug-addled guru dispensing wisdom that I've seen in my visions, but one of the things that happens when you use entheogens is a lot of stuff gets stripped away, and anger gets stripped away, and all of the stuff. But what you're left with, if you do a guided MDMA experience, once everything else is stripped away, what is left over is empathy and compassion. And so at the heart of who we are, those are the things that exist. And so I think that having difficult conversations is necessary. Calling people out on their shit is necessary. Getting called out on your shit is necessary. But compassion as the driver for truth is a much more effective way to help people achieve what you believe they can achieve, or what they might not believe they can achieve, because no one is really benefiting from getting just eviscerated. Like just because you can hide behind the veil of honesty, cutting someone down in a vicious way doesn't serve anyone. So no matter what the truth is, no matter what you have to say to someone, there's a kind way to tell a hard truth. And I think that that's not sugarcoating. I think that it's not using, it's not pillowing the hard stuff. I think it's just leading with kindness and compassion, even in the most difficult of situations. And the people who can do that, I find, are the ones that are going to have the greatest impact.
Love it. Absolutely love it. And then, John, final one, mate. For you, what does it mean to be able to lead a nourished life?
I think it's ever changing, but I think that, like, for me, it's come down to community, community and legacy. Like, I want to feel like I'm contributing to the world, which used to, I think, be very, very ego driven. I wanted to be the guy who had written books, but now I want to write books so that people can read them and gain from them. So I think that, like, when I envision a nourished life, it's outside of having a healthy body and mind and bank account, it's if I have a great partner by my side, a couple of great friends at my back, a dog at my feet, a child at my knee, and a bookshelf full of work of which I am proud, that is a nourished life.
Beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. John, look, you've been amazing. Just completely acknowledge you. I first things first, the younger version of myself, i.e. the 18-year-old personal trainer, which was 10 years ago, was sat there with your book. So he wants to say a big thank you, because that was something that he put through. I think it was a group of personal trainers of about 100 people. We actually put that book through. Was it?
That's amazing.
Yeah. But
Man
say thank you.
Engineering.
Yeah, that was one.
That was also the superhero workout as well. Yeah.
And that one. But there's also that. But John, also from this aspect where you impacted my life, but also through to today, I just want to say, like, your vulnerability, like putting yourself out there to help other people, going through your own story, what you've done yourself, and being so honest and raw and speaking about it, it's rare, and I absolutely love it. And I love the fact you are actually raising humanity up as you raise yourself up. So I just want to acknowledge you on that, John. But John, where can everybody find you? Where can people see more of what you do, and more to the point, see more about what you create, write, and hopefully there's a new book.
Thank you so much for
in the process.
There are many new books on the way. Firstly, thank you for that acknowledgement. And I don't ever want to be perceived as being hard to my younger, the person that I used to be. I think that imperfect though he was, all of the different versions of me have gotten me to where I am. And so the books that I wrote, I'm still proud of, and I'm happy that they helped you and the people that you've helped. So thank you for that. That really is gratifying. As for now, I am very findable on the internet. For those who like receiving email, if you go to my site, johnromaniello.com, you can sign up for my newsletter list, and there you will find out all the things that I'm up to whenever I decide to email. The most frequent form of communication for me right now, and I think for the world, is social media, in particular the Instagram. So if you follow me there, please, if you are listening to this podcast and you're getting something out of it at any point, please, I would love if you just like screenshot and then post it and tag me so that I actually see it, or always feel free to slide into my DMs. The stuff that I'm working on is it can be weighty material. A lot of it's fun, a lot of it's hard, a lot of it's big, but much of it is small. And then the small stuff day to day, again, the magic and that mundanity, that's where I like to dance all the time, because between the next book and the last book, between all the big programs that are going to come out, between being able to say things like this celebrity endorsed me or whatever, there is a lot of time spent staring at my phone, typing up things that I hope you like, and I would love to hear if you like them. So please, whatever from this podcast or any other, always feel free to just like put it out in the world and let me know, and I will always get back to you.
John, it's been an absolute pleasure, mate. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me, truly.